Good morning. We are going to jump into Psalm 23 this morning. This psalm was written by a man named David. And when David was growing up, he was actually a shepherd. So he was the youngest in his family, which means he had the least important and least desired job out of any job that there was. So he was a shepherd, and then he ended up becoming king. And it's thought actually that when he's writing this 23rd Psalm, that he's actually already become king at this point. He begins by saying this: "The Lord is my shepherd." You see, a shepherd in those days had 3 jobs. The first one was to guide. And this would be he would lead the sheep where they were supposed to go in the pasture. The second would have been to be the physician. So if a sheep was ever injured or hurt, the shepherd would take care of him and heal him. The third and the final one being the protector. So if a predator was to come at the sheep, they had no form of defense for themselves, and so the shepherd would get rid of the predator. The sheep belong to the shepherd. You'll notice in this psalm, when he starts, David doesn't write, "The Lord is a shepherd," or even that the Lord is the shepherd. Now, I believe that the Lord is the good shepherd, but he writes this in such a personal way. He says, "The Lord is my shepherd." A man named Spurgeon wrote in a commentary, he said this: "Before a person can truly say, 'The Lord is my shepherd,' he must first feel himself to be a sheep by nature." Well, we've talked about the shepherd and what the shepherd's role was, but let's talk about the sheep for a second. I know you know what a sheep is, but sheep were often said to be the most foolish of animals. In fact, they would wander off and sometimes even get lost, and they had very little chance of returning to the flock. That and the fact that they didn't have any way to defend themselves from a predator. You see, the sheep needs the shepherd. Well, we also know that sheep are said to be very loyal animals. In fact, they loved their leader and they would listen to them. See, when I was growing up, my cousins and I, we would go visit my grandparents in Ohio that lived on a farm, and they oftentimes had sheep, and we loved the sheep. So we would go out to the barn and we would cross over the fence, going just hoping we could play with the sheep. Well, it was inevitable. Every time we'd cross the fence, the sheep would just run. They're kind of skittish. They'd run away. Well, we would watch my grandpa, and he would come out, and the moment he'd cross over the fence, he'd go, "Here, sheep." Well, these sheep, they would come running at him, and they would surround him, this flock of sheep. Well, the reality is that they knew and they trusted my grandpa. Of course, yes, they were hungry, and they knew he would feed them, but he provided and he took care of them. Well, it's like John 10 says, that the sheep know the good shepherd's voice and they follow him. You see, if we're going to see Jesus as the shepherd, we must see ourselves as the sheep. David continues in this passage. Right after he says, "The Lord is my shepherd," he continued and said, "I shall not want." Well, the "I shall not want" simply means they trust the shepherd to take care of them, and they have no other needs. The Lord has met those needs. Well, David then continues and says, "He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me by still waters." Well, these green pastures and these still waters, this was a place of safety for the sheep to rest. Well, the other thing about sheep is that if these 4 things are not met for the sheep, they cannot rest and they won't even lie down. The first one being, if the sheep is afraid, he won't lie down and rest. If there's tension in the flock, they're said to be social animals, and if there's tension, they won't lie down and rest. Third, if there's flies bugging them or other insects, then they can't lie down and rest. And last, if they're hungry and they are anxious about where their food will be, they can't lie down and rest. You see, rest comes because we trust the good shepherd. Do you trust your good shepherd? Again, David continues and he says, "He restores my soul." You see, the good shepherd, he takes us from the pride and the sin in our lives, and he restores us to new life. He wants to take care of you and restore you to new life. There are so many other promises throughout this passage, and I hope that today you'll spend some time with it and let the Lord speak to you. And as you do that, I challenge you to think about these 2 questions. Are you willing to see yourself as a sheep? And are you willing to trust your shepherd?